Welcome, everyone. The subcommittee will come to order. Today, we're considering the fiscal year 2017 Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill. As you know, this subcommittee has jurisdiction over a diverse group of agencies and activities, including financial regulators, tax collection, the White House, federal courts, District of Columbia, General Service Administration, and the Small Business Administration. The bill is the product of 8 hearings and more than 1,800 requests from members on both sides of the aisle. The bill provides $21.7 billion in discretionary funding. That's $1.5 billion, or 6.5% less than the fiscal year 2016, and $2.7 billion, or 11% below the request. The subcommittee's allocation is a significant reduction compared to 2016. Nevertheless, the allocation is sufficient to fund vital federal programs, as well as the one-time set-asides for the expenses of the presidential transition. Law enforcement and administration of justice are among the bill's priorities. Funding for the high-intensity drug trafficking areas and drug-free community programs are at record all-time highs, as is the funding for the Treasury's Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, which enforces sanctioned programs. In addition, there's a healthy amount of funding for both the federal and D.C. judicial branches of government for the supervision of offenders and defendants that are living within our communities. Another priority for the bill is supporting small businesses, help grow the economy and create jobs. This bill provides $157 million for SBA's business loan programs to support $28.5 billion in 7A lending and $7.5 billion in 504 lending. The bill also provides record high amounts for funding for the SBA grant programs in total, funding for the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, the Treasury's Community Development Financial Institutions Fund Program, which includes for the first time a set-aside for CDFIs that assist individuals with disabilities to overcome any financial backstops. In order to fund these high-priority programs at these levels, we had to reduce funding in some other areas. We cut funding for nearly 24 agencies and programs that can operate with a little bit less, such as the Office of Management and Budget and the Federal Communications Commission. The brunt of the reductions, however, is borne by GSA and the IRS, since they are the largest agencies in the bill and both have a recent history of inappropriate behavior. While the bill reduces GSA funding for new construction by $1.1 billion, we provide a sizable amount for repair and alterations. In addition, we continue to push GSA to develop an accurate inventory of federal property and designate funding for GSA to use existing space more efficiently. It's been 3 years and 3 commissioners since we learned that the IRS betrayed the trust of Americans by applying inappropriate scrutiny to certain groups. Instead of turning over a new leaf, the IRS made a series of embarrassing management mistakes at the expense of customer service. To remedy this, the bill includes numerous provisions to reform the IRS and reduces their funding $236 million, excuse me, below the current level. I think I'll drink some water.
That's your problem, you've been drinking water.
You got it? Is there an alternative? To remedy this, the bill includes numerous provisions to reform the IRS and reduce their funding $236 million and lower that by 1.3 below the request. Within the total for IRS, however, there's $290 million that's set aside for the IRS to improve customer service, cyber security, and fraud prevention. To increase transparency and oversight of agencies, the bill makes Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Office of Financial Research subject to the appropriations process and changes the CFPB's leadership from a single director to a 5-member commission. It also requires the Federal Communications Commission to make orders publicly available for 21 days before the commission votes on them. To prevent agency overreach, the bill gives businesses the opportunity to change their operations prior to being designated as a systemically important financial institution. It prohibits the CFPB from outlawing pre-dispute arbitration, requires certain court challenges to be resolved before the FCC implements the net neutrality order, and prohibits the FCC from regulating broadband rates. In addition, the committee has strong concerns that the FCC seems to be prolonging their pattern of regulatory overreach with its recent set-top box proposal. And so we include language that requires the FCC to stop and study this controversial rule before they move any further. The telecommunications industry is more competitive than ever, and yet the Commission has been more active than ever trying to control market innovation. To return the FCC's focus towards mission-critical work and away from the politically charged rulemakings, the bill requires the FCC to do less, with less. To give low-income families the option of selecting a school that best meets the educational needs of their children, the bill includes the text of the Scholarship for Opportunity Results Act, which passed the House last month. The bill also includes two other bills that passed the House this year to adapt bankruptcy code for large financial institutions and to establish a small business advocate within the SEC. I want to thank all the members of the subcommittee for their input into this bill. I want to thank them for their participation in our hearings. This is going to be Mr. Ridgell's last subcommittee markup, and so I want to say a special thanks to him. I also, likewise, will be leaving this esteemed body, and I want to thank Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Lowy, for their leadership and support in advancing this bill. And I especially want to thank Ranking Member Mr. Serrano. He's had the unique perspective of having been chairman of this subcommittee as well as the ranking member, and I think he understands uniquely the tension that goes on. And I'm sure this bill is not the same bill that he would have written, but I can tell you it's a better bill because of his input. I value his relationship. I value our partnership, and it's been great to work with you for these last 4 years. So now I'll turn to a ranking member for any comments he might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first, with your permission, bend the rules a little bit and acknowledge Ms. Holmes Norton, the champion for the people of Washington, D.C., and a colleague in many of our fights on this floor and in this House. A few weeks ago, I was saddened to learn that this will be Chairman Crenshaw's last term in Congress and his last year in charge of this subcommittee. So let me begin by thanking you for the partnership we have had on this subcommittee over the years. Although we don't agree on everything, you have always been fair, direct, and honest with our side in the way you have conducted this subcommittee. You have tried to find common ground and to accommodate us when you were able. We may disagree on some of the priorities of this subcommittee, but we have never been disagreeable. This goodwill and even-handedness is something that I would like to compliment the staff on both sides for as well. Many people here realize just how important staff is in creating the bill and report before us today. They have spent many long nights and weekends preparing for us today, and I know all the members on my side, as well as yours, are very thankful. Given this, it pains me to oppose the product before us today. This bill is inadequately funds agencies vitally important to the American people. The overall funding level in the bill is $21.735 billion, which is $1.5 billion or 6% below last year's level, and 11% below the President's request. The bill is loaded down with dozens of riders that are divisive and partisan. That said, there are a few areas where I want to commend the majority. The Community Development of Financial Institutions Fund is funded at $250 million, $16.5 million above the enacted level and $4 million above the President's request. CDFI provides significant economic development and investment in underserved areas like my district in the Bronx, and there is a bipartisan support and has been for its work. The Small Business Administration is also well-funded, including microloans, prime, small business development centers, and women's business centers. The 7A loan authorization limit is also increased. The federal judiciary is well-funded, ensuring that the third branch constitutional obligations can be met. Unfortunately, numerous agencies are woefully underfunded. The IRS has cut $236 million from FY17. from 2010 to 2015 budget cuts have forced the IRS to cut its workforce by 18%. This harms honest taxpayers who need help, and frankly, it helps those who wish to cheat the government out of the taxes they owe. The Securities and Exchange Commission is funded at $226 million below the president's request and $50 million below enacted. We should not be cutting funding for the agency primarily responsible for preventing the abuses that cause our financial meltdown. Riders that are harmful to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, an entity charged with protecting consumers from unfair, deceptive, or abusive financial practices, are included here as well. The Federal Communications Commission is cut by $69 million below enacted and $43 million below the president's request. The Office of Management and Budget is funded at $10 million below the president's request. The bill also includes dozens of unnecessary partisan riders and entire bills that make compromise next to impossible. Given the amount of authorizing language that has been attached to the bill, we could argue that this is not even an appropriations bill, but an authorizing one. The FTC is subject to numerous riders that restrict both implemented and proposed rules. Once again, the majority attempts to stop the FCC's net neutrality rule. None of the fears that opponents of the rule advanced in the lead up to this implementation have come to pass. There have been increased investment, continued expansion, and increased profits for internet service providers. There's no reason to continue the crusade against this rule. In addition to budget cuts, the IRS is once again subject to a number of policy riders aimed at the Republicans' twin obsessions of the Affordable Care Act and 501c4 reform. The agency is prevented from implementing the individual mandate, as well as transfers from the Department of Health and Human Services. They are also prevented from addressing the 501c4 regulations, which have been open to confusion and in some case abuse by nonprofit groups. These are unnecessary and counterproductive. The inclusion of the individual mandate rider would actually ensure that there would be a serious loss of revenue by the government. Additionally, the bill attempts to limit transparency in government by including two riders to restrict the public's ability to know who corporations and in particular federal contractors are giving political donations to. The bill also includes a number of riders limiting women's health choices, both in federal health plans and in the District of Columbia, which is once again prevented from using its own dollars to provide legal abortion services to low-income women. The bill includes further interference in the District of Columbia's local affairs by repealing the locally passed law allowing the district to use its own local funds without the approval of Congress. Even though courts have ruled in the district's favor in recent court cases, and the bill includes several provisions attempting to stop the president's continued engagement with Cuba. They seek to reinstitute the failed policies of the past 50 years and should be removed. Let me take a moment, Mr. Chairman, to say what I always say, and that is that since I was born in Puerto Rico, an American colony, I take very seriously how we deal with the District of Columbia. I know we have a constitutional responsibility, but I think we always play our hand in our desire to experiment on the District of Columbia, that which we can't do back home. Also, in particular, I find it troubling that at time when we're trying to find solutions to Puerto Rico's fiscal crises, including allowing for restructuring of its debt, that instead of addressing that issue, this bill includes language on corporate bankruptcy. It goes to show where our nation's priorities lie when it comes to the territories. These riders inject a level of partisan politics that is unnecessary, unwarranted, and unhelpful. In fact, I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, that there are many people on our side, and I know I'm not speaking out of term with our ranking member here, Ms. Lowy, that there are many people who want to vote for these bills, but it's the riders, not the numbers at times, that stop us from voting for the bill in the past few years. For all of the talk of returning to regular order, both sides of the aisle know it will be near impossible to do so with the inclusion of these veto bait provisions. Many are simply retreads of failed efforts from previous years. They're an effort to appease the right wing of the right wing. The result is that we will simply end up with a CR or worse. I hope we can find the common ground necessary to have a good bill that helps the American people. But the bill before us today contains no such compromise, and I cannot support it at this point. And believe me, Mr. Chairman, there's nothing that I would like more than to see my name in green when this bill comes to the floor. But as it stands now, we need to continue to work on it. And I thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Serrano. Now I'd like to turn to the Chairman of the full Appropriations Committee, Chairman Rogers, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for your stewardship of this subcommittee and your terms in Congress. This is your valedictory bill that we're taking up as we speak. We're going to miss you in the Congress. I'm going to especially miss you on our committee. And this subcommittee is going to miss the experience and wisdom that you have given to it for these years. So good luck to you on the next chapter. We're going to stay in touch, hopefully, and wish you well along the way. You're lucky to have this ranking member that you have. I've had the pleasure as well on other subcommittees of being colleagues of Mr. Serrano. And there's just no one any better. I mean, eventually he's going to support this bill. So we've got to be nice to him along the way here. But Serrano is a wonderful human being. This is a good bill. It's incredible the broad range of agencies and programs that this bill covers. There's none, I don't think, that has quite the breadth of the government that this one does. So you've got to oversee a broad range of agencies and programs, which can make it difficult to strike the right balance, but I think you have. $21.7 billion bill, that's $1.5 billion below the current level, and $2.7 billion below what the President requests was. You've prioritized programs that fulfill critical services while also taking important steps to rein in agencies that have not been performing adequately on behalf of the American taxpayer. Additionally, you bring the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Office of Financial Research under the annual appropriations process for fiscal year 18, subjecting these two agencies to the scrutiny of this committee will make them more transparent and responsive to the American people, in my judgment. So I congratulate you especially on that. I'm also pleased that the bill continues the committee's strong support for efforts to reduce drug abuse and addiction in our country. CDC calls it an epidemic, killing overdose of prescription medicines, killing more people than car wrecks. Specifically, as you noted, you achieve a record funding level for the high-intensity drug trafficking areas, HIDA program, rejecting yet again the President's request to cut over 20% to these important task forces, which benefit so many of our communities. HIDAs provide a critically important service to the areas of the country that are completely besieged by illegal drug trafficking and abuse, districts like mine. The Appalachian HIDA has played a crucial role as we've battled the scourge of prescription drug abuse in southern and eastern Kentucky. And I know other HIDAs around the country are helping to confront this ever-growing problem in their regions. Additionally, the bill provides increases to the Drug-Free Communities program, which supports critical prevention-oriented coalitions all over the country to keep our kids safe and drug-free. I'm proud this committee fully funds these effective programs that help our states and communities stem the tide of abuse and addiction that has swept across our country. Other areas of importance include funding for the federal judiciary and financial programs that help the development of small businesses. While maintaining the committee's strong support for the federal bench, the subcommittee also supports programs like the Small Business Administration and the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund that provide a critical lifeline for communities that are struggling with economic opportunity and job creation. This includes communities across Appalachia, which are trying to cope with the loss of tens of thousands of coal mining jobs as we speak. So, Mr. Chairman, this is a good bill. You've produced another good one. This is one in a long line of good bills that you've produced from this subcommittee. And I congratulate you and Mr. Serrano, members of the subcommittee, who work hard, and of course the staff. I yield.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to turn to Ms. Lowy for any opening statements she might make.
Thank you, and I too. Should I tell him again how wonderful he is?
Yes.
You will truly be missed, and I have appreciated our friendship. You are not only intelligent, but thoughtful, compassionate, a really good man. And I do wish I could support the bill at this point. Perhaps as it moves along, that we'll be able to moderate some of the language that I know you didn't think of yourself. So, again, you will be greatly missed, and for me, it's really a pleasure to have served with you, and good luck in whatever you decide to do next with your family or professionally or whatever it is. But it's been a pleasure knowing you and working with you.
With the
And of course,
gentlelady yield,
Yes.
I'm really surprised at his departure. I can't imagine wanting to be here when you could be in
Beware?
Ponte Vedra. Great resort in his district.
Oh, I don't know that. Oh. Well, well, before you go back to your district, I hope you'll adjust and work with the chairman and adjust the number for Zika, because you don't want to go back to those mosquitoes. Because mosquitoes are not selective, whether it's a wonderful resort or a little group of homes, so we'll work together on that. Thank you. And Mr. Serrano, of course, there's no question that he's a good partner, he's been a good friend, he's been a member of the New York delegation, and I know he is always a fighter for what's right. So thank you both for this bill. Now, Mr. Chairman, long after it has become clear that the House will not adopt a budget resolution, I do remain deeply disappointed that this committee still does not have a full slate of 302B allocations, which are necessary for members of this committee, both Democrats and Republicans, to properly evaluate whether each bill is receiving its fair share of our strict cap on discretionary spending. Since our very first markup, the Democrats have expressed serious concern that the first bills would consume a disproportionate share, leaving far too little for bills later in the process. Now this is coming to pass. The financial services and general government's bill allocation is $1.5 billion less than last year's already inadequate level, making it impossible to invest enough in critical priorities. The allocation provides $21.735 billion, a cut of 6% from current levels, and $2.7 billion, or 11% below the president's request. Sadly, it's no surprise which agencies would be subject to impractical and inadequate allocations as a result. In fact, I often wonder, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Chairman, why a distinguished, successful businessman like Mr. Koskinen would even endure what he has endured and still is serving our country in a way that many of us think is with distinction. Because the bill slashes IRS's resources, which would allow more tax cheats to go undetected, prevent law-abiding Americans from getting the assistance they deserve. I just don't understand that. Funding the SEC at $226 million below the request would thwart its ability to protect investors. This is particularly egregious because the SEC is fee-funded and adequate funding authority would not cost taxpayers a dime. Instead of investing in infrastructure, the bill would cut GSA construction and acquisition projects by $1.3 billion. The bill only partially funds a new headquarters for the FBI and does not fund the next phase of the Department of Homeland Security's headquarters, further delaying the ability to consolidate our Homeland Security apparatus into one location. As usual with the financial services bill, inadequate funding is only part of the story, and the long list of riders turns a bad bill into an example of the Republican majority's unnecessary culture war. Attacks on women's health care, efforts to block implementation of the Affordable Care Act, a demeaning effort to dictate local governance to Washington, D.C. are particularly shameful. The long list of authorizing provisions remains troublesome and includes 4 restrictive provisions on Cuba and 2 blocking the FCC's net neutrality order. Once again, these misguided provisions jeopardize the success of the overall appropriations process. However, despite these numerous shortcomings, I do want to thank the chairman for supporting some of my longstanding priorities, including the Small Business Administration, helping communities combat the growing heroin epidemic by increasing the Drug-Free Communities Program and the High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas Program. I want to make it very clear in conclusion. Democrats, and I talk for, I'm sure, all the members of this subcommittee, are eager to support bills that include adequate spending levels. I'm not even talking about great spending levels, because we all know and care about watching our budget and looking at the numbers carefully. I'm talking about adequate, and that are absent of unnecessary riders. And I wish my colleagues could just save those riders for the authorization process. You know, I came onto the Appropriations Committee quite a while ago, and we used to say there are Democrats, there are Republicans, and there are appropriators. So perhaps we can use those riders more effectively and have a real good debate on the authorization process. But I do hope that as we move forward, the bill makes those investments and sheds misguided, in my judgment, misguided policy changes. And thank you very much for your service.
Well, thank you very much. Are there any other members that would like to be recognized? If not, then I'll recognize Mr. Graves for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that your final mark, the chairman's mark, be reported to full committee.
All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is approved. The ayes have it, and the bill is approved. I ask unanimous consent to be authorized to make technical and conforming adjustments to the items approved today. So without objection, that is so ordered. And let me remind members that you can leave your copies of the bill here and report for the staff to collect. Mr. Serrano.
Chairman, before we close officially, I just want to echo again, because I dream of the days when with Chairman Rogers and I used to had the he as chairman and I as ranking member, the Commerce Justice Science State Committee. And it wasn't unnatural for us to see close to 400 votes on the board at the end of a bill. And our situation was very simple in those days. He would show up at the table right after the president's speech and budget and say, these 10 items are non-negotiable. I would say these 10 items are non-negotiable. And then the staff would sit down and work on the other minus 20 items. And then the 20 items, he and I would work at the end. And so we managed to get these bills having the same philosophies that we have now, having the same differences, but it's those writers, and I don't want to drive it to death, that keep killing us. It's those writers that keep coming back and hurting bills. And it's also a desire by some people to think that if you cripple some agencies, like the IRS, you accomplish something big. And lastly, and I say this with respect, but I think we all need to analyze it. This obsession we have with governing directly the District of Columbia is really unfair and undemocratic. What happens is that a lot of people are asked, how are you on abortions? Very strong. Where? Well, in D.C. And how are you on vouchers for school? Well, I'm very strong. Where? Well, in D.C. In other words, people who don't do things in their district because they can't use Washington, D.C. as the place to manifest their discontent or their desire. Now, for me, that's personal, as I said before, because I was born in an American colony called Puerto Rico, and in many ways it's treated very similarly to D.C. So when I became chairman of this committee, I made a statement that hadn't been made before and will never be made again. I said I actually wanted to give up power. When it came to D.C., I wanted to give up power. I didn't want to gain more power as chairman. A couple of people told me I was crazy, but I said it. All that to say, there is a process from now to a final bill. Let's try to make an effort this year that we haven't been able to make before. That writers belong somewhere else and numbers belong here. And I think you'd be surprised at the kind of numbers we can get on that board for this final vote.
Mr. Rogers said he's taken back everything he said nice about you. With that, the meeting is adjourned.
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Good work.